impacting it without problems. And that's cool and fine. You can build sandcastles in your head about that all day, but how your violent revolution works on the reality, at least that's what history has shown us, is always disaster. So
Well, let's break this down because there are a couple of claims that you just made that I do not necessarily support. For one, do you think it is fundamentally a waste of time to discuss or advocate for the implementation of an ideology that has never seen practical implementation before?
I mean, it could be fun, so it isn't a complete waste of time, but kind of, yes.
You do? You don't think then that the experiments in capitalist ideology purported by like French and English philosophers back during the 17th century were worthwhile, even though their ideologies had yet to be applied? The whole Enlightenment was consisted almost exclusively of intellectuals discussing ideas that had yet to see practical implementation.
So what you think is your idea of the one true communism, as it is idealized in your version, is how it will work out when your idea is implemented, or?
No, of course not. I discussed this on stream. I know that there's going to be a vast gulf between ideological and practical implementation. I also know, as a good Marxist, that whatever society rises out from the ruins of capitalism will be procured not from ideology, but rather from the material conditions of the time. Just because material conditions are the prominent determinant factor in what comes next doesn't mean we shouldn't discuss the ideology, though.
I mean, you can discuss stuff all day, but that's not what we are talking about. You're talking about violent revolution, executing the enemies of your ideology, executing rich people, employers, like everybody. That's kind of on the evil side for me. And discussing ideas, I don't have a problem with that. But when you talk about like genocide, that's where it stops being funny. You know?
Well, it ain't genocide. We're not talking about eliminating a people, a culture, a race, a society, a gender, or nothing like that. We're
Does
talking about
genocide
eliminating.
have to be related to genetics? Can't you say genocide rich people?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, during the French Revolution, when they started up and separating the heads of nobles from their bodies, would you say that was a genocide of the noblemen?
I mean, I'm not really familiar with the technical definition of the English word genocide, but if you want to argue about that, then maybe.
If you want to say the French Revolution constituted genocide, then I would be willing to admit that I am interested in genocide against the
Let's
wealthy. I
okay.
don't
Let,
think
let's
that's
say
common
let's say
parlance,
mass
though.
let's say mass murder. If
Oh, I'm
on
totally
the
fine with
scale of a
that.
genocide, if you like that term, or if it
So,
makes you feel
so
better.
to hone in on this, and I do because genocide tends to carry racial or ethnic connotations that I'm not comfortable with. But if we're to hone in on your problem with me, I don't think you have a problem with my ideas. Ideologically,
Oh
I
yes, I
don't
very
think
much
you
do.
have. Oh, well, damn, I was going to focus this discussion. So, what do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about the practical implementation of socialist ideals, or do you want to talk about the fact that I want to kill uh, some 2 or 3% of the United States?
I'm a part of that 2 or 3%. Please don't kill me.
Except for you, except for that guy. Obviously, I would never kill that guy.
I mean, you kind of said that you want to kill everybody that exploits labor of other people, which under your definition is every employer, basically. So I don't
Well,
I don't
I
really
don't.
know what you're planning there, but I don't think it's practical or good or moral in any sense of the way for most people.
I really should clarify. As fun it is to discuss hyperbole, I'm not talking about black shirted death gangs running around the United States, finding everyone who's ever collected a W 2 from their employee and cutting their heads off. I am talking about a pragmatic and socially organized effort to retrieve from the hands of the bourgeoisie the means to control production in this country. That can mean a lot of things. It would by no means be clean and would no means concise, but it would not be some uncontrolled, indiscriminate execution of everyone who's ever owned more than $2,000 in their savings account at any given time.
And you do that because you are ultimately convinced that your crafted version of handcrafted version of communism is, unlike all the other real world implementations, not going to fail, result in an autocracy that's failing and miserable for every inhabitant.
Well, no, the two things are separate. I mean, I believe that the aforementioned proletarian revolution is a necessary step in removing ourselves from capitalism, but that has nothing to do with what comes after. This could preempt a fascist state, though it probably wouldn't. A fascist state probably wouldn't kick off with the execution of business owners. But I mean, hypothetically,
If they fight back and execute the communists and go to the other extreme, it might.
yeah, could
I
always
mean,
happen.
you're
But we're
talking about
talking
civil
about
war,
two different
yes.
things. We're talking about, there are two issues here. We're talking about the revolution and the blood, and we're talking about the practical implementation of communist values. And these are, I think, separate enough that we should specify which one we're talking about if we're going to argue.
I mean, what do you want to talk about, buddy?
I mean, I'm good with,
I'm
but
you're
I'm a
so
card carrying, Antifa recent social science college graduate. I am ready to discuss any and every aspect of my ideology. I'm in my bathrobe. It's 2:16 on a Saturday. I just had my sesame crisps. I'm good. Do you want to talk about the
I mean,
revolution? I'm ready.
the thing is, you want to talk about your version of communism, right? I mean, you can. That's like what Stephen already told you. I am arguing for the real world implementation of
No, no,
capitalism
no.
with all its faults.
I won't talk about anarcho-syndicalism if you don't want to. We can talk about the most baseline implementation of socialism, the implementation of policies which do have pragmatic and, more importantly, oh darn, what's that term I'm looking for? Real world application that has been tried and tested. If you want me to go up to bat for the most blasé baseline tier of socialist thought, I'm willing to do so, because that's still 1,000 steps ahead of what we have now.
I mean, I guess I'm just not convinced your ideas will play out and result in a system that is as you describe it. I guess it.
What ideas?
Your anarcho-syndicalism, take everything from the capital owners and give to the workers. So councils form that decide what to do with the capital or whatever. I don't think that's going to work out. I think it's going to result in a dictatorship. I think it's going to result in an autocracy, like it always has in history. It has never worked out, dude. Never.
The professor, would you kindly mind not doing that? That the other person speaking. Would you mind muting your mic? No worries. I love you. All right. Well, hey, LEDDUDE, how about we move through a timeline and you can tell me when you think I've gone too far. Can we do that?
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to paint a word picture from you, okay? The year is 2064, all right? Late stage capitalism is in its final decades, all right? Society has never been more efficient, but never before have the worker been so alienated from that which they produce. Trade deficits are rolling out the fucking wagon because businesses are more interested in shoring their money up in offshore accounts than they are in reinvesting into the businesses that they purport to represent. We are now looking at the final gasp of capitalism. Now, young, ambitious individuals like myself, but in the future, so they're cooler, take to the streets, first with protests. What are we going to do about this crumbling economic system? Their protests are met with derision, with violence at the hands of police, and if we're going full cyberpunk, violence at the hands of corporate security. All right, the protests get more and more violent, more and more directed against particular groups, and eventually we are looking at the broiling beginnings of a full-blown proletarian revolution. All right, now
I
here's
mean,
what starts. Oh,
can I
oh, okay, all right, yeah.
can I stop you like kind of right there, because I think you're painting this movie set of some kind of cyberpunk movie where you're like the edgy protagonist communist
Well, I
that
would be very
that's
old
that
in this.
destroys the fucking system, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't think we're steering towards some dystopian future. I think stuff is getting better worldwide. All metrics are on the rise. Everything's getting better thanks to capitalism, thanks to global trade, thanks to scientific development. I don't think that's what we're heading to.
Okay, I mean, people are getting less and less happy. Housing is growing less affordable. Student debt is rising. Wealth inequality is growing tremendously. There's an increasing level of disconnect between the interests of the citizens and the political interests of our
Is it
elected
actually true that
representatives.
people are getting less happy because I seem to remember from the World Happiness Report that overall it's kind of on the rise.
I should clarify, Americans are getting less happy. I'm sure that happiness indexes are
Oh
rising
yeah,
in the rest of the world.
America's kind of fucked, yeah. But
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should, and I am coming at this from a bit of a productive space. What country do you live in?
Germany. I think you can
Okay.
tell from the accent, can't you?
Well, yes, I presumed, but I've spoken to and had, let me tell you, some phenomenal rumps with people who live in America who have your accent. So I didn't want to be presumptive. Do you really? This is an aside. Do you really support the far right German party?
No, I don't. I don't know what these people are talking about. I
Okay,
voted
all right. Don't
left
trust the
wing.
memes. I get it. Well, we're dealing, I think, with different sets of arguments. I can make a convincing argument for the inevitable overturn of late stage capitalism, and I can make a convincing argument for the ethical necessity of violent revolution, and I can make a decent set of arguments for the practical implementation of socialist values, but like I can't do all of them at once. So
I
what
don't think you
step?
can even do the first thing. I don't think you can make a coherent argument for how this is going to play out in the way you think, because the trends globally are pointing in the opposite direction. There's no indication that this is going to happen. All you can do is like tell me a story of how it's going to happen, and I can say I don't believe it. So that's where we're going to end up.
That's true. Ultimately, theories on the end of capitalism are that theoretical, but I can point to plenty of real world trends which suggest that there are many standards by which our lives are getting worse and many problems which are not being addressed within the current economic paradigm. And I can extrapolate from those trends that we will eventually reach a breaking point at which we have no choice but to abandon our current system.
Is this going to be the infinite growth can't be sustained meme, or?
It's a good, I mean, it is a good meme. Corporations do predicate their stock value on an assumption of continued growth. Companies that don't grow are considered to be companies in decline.
I don't
Growth is the
necessarily
standard.
think they're wrong. I think we can kind of pull off infinite growth, at least for a couple more 100 years. Depends on how scientific advancement is going.
Do you want to push back the proletarian revolution a couple hundred years then?
I don't think we're going to have a proletariat anymore in a couple 100 years. I think robots are going to do everything then for us.
Well, that won't necessarily deal with the problems of alienation and worker disenfranchisement.
Yeah, I think that's where we're heading towards more automation, towards more technology, and I think that's going to fuel the continuous growth of the system that it relies on.
I
At least
strongly
until we are
disagree.
post-scarcity.
I don't think we're ever going to reach a point of post scarcity, personally. I think automation is going to drive an ever larger wedge between those who own the means of productions and those who do not. Because in the past, business holders, or business owners, I'm
So
sorry,
are you
and
against
those who hold.
automation?
I am against what automation will do to this capitalist society. I am not against automation in principle.
Okay.
Automation is essential.
Yeah, I
After
agree.
all, yeah,
It's
I mean,
wonderful.
what greater goal is there than to reduce the mundanity of life for the common man? That's the real problem with life. It's not suffering or hate or fear, it's mundanity. The knowledge that in this finite span we have on Earth, some 20, 30, 40, 50 years of it might be meted out on some factory work floor where you grow not at all, learn nothing, develop in no way. Automation reduces human mundanity, and for that reason, I am principally in support of it. However, in this society, all it is going to do is fully disconnect the interests and the representation of business owners from that which they previously were beholden to. That is to say, their employees.
So, do you think in the past business owners had the interests of their workers more in mind than now?
No,
Do you
but I
know
think in sorry,
did you know about the development of workers' rights, especially in Europe
I
in
am
the last
intricately
century?
I'm very familiar with the development of workers' rights in America. I'm afraid I don't know much about how they developed in Europe.
Well, actually, it was first in Germany where people began to strike, and social safety and such was developed, and workers' rights were fought for. And over time, there has been much progress made, and this progress moved along with more automation. Workers gain more rights, and I think this trend is continuing. People work time overall is decreasing. The working conditions are getting safer. We have less toxic substances people are exposed to. I think it's getting better, dude, not worse.
Oh, true. I mean, wages have been stagnating, at least in America, for some 50 years. But yes, work
Only
has
for
generally.
blue-collar workers, though.
Right. Well, I am talking about the noble proletariat here.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
And even for white collar workers, all but the say upper 5% of the country's workers, wages have absolutely stagnated, at least in relation to the rising costs of college tuition, rent, medical care. Wages would have to skyrocket tomorrow and keep skyrocketing for years to have any chance at catching up with those trends.
Isn't it also true that while true wages may have stagnated, that the benefits that work gives increase, like company issued healthcare, retirement shit and stuff? Didn't that also increase and offset that a little bit?
Not since Reagan, no. Here in the States, workers' benefits and rights have been steadily decreasing since the mid 80s. Clinton furthered it along, and it's kind of seen a downward trend since that point. Again, and I understand there's a bit of a cultural divide here. I'm sure Germany is more progressive in these regards than we are. So we're coming from two different sets of assumptions. But over here, wages, rights, and benefits have stagnated substantially over the past few decades. And there does not seem to be a trend of reversal in the near future.
Okay. I guess my next argument is going to be that you can fix this without a violent communist revolution. I think the biggest problem is the corrupt US political system.
That's a big one, but I would argue that the corruption in the US political system is a product and feature of capitalism, not a bug. I don't think that capitalism is functioning poorly in this country at all. I think it's working exactly as it's intended to. Though
So
to
how
say
are
it's
there
intended to work at all.
So how are there
Sorry.
capitalist countries that are doing much better and don't have these problems, at least to this scale, if it's inherent to capitalism?
Well, partly because the US occupies an essential role in global trade that would have to be filled by someone, were it not for us. China occupies a comparable role, though predominantly with lower skilled labor production. But for the most part, capitalism relies on, at least in the modern era, global trade, which necessitates the existence of a dominant trading partner, an overarching, all consuming monster of wealth. And America fills that role quite well. Were it not for this country and its despicable capitalist, internal corruption, I
What
do
about the
think.
American role do you think is so unique that that differentiates it from European countries?
Do you think, and I apologize for posing this to you as a hypothetical, but do you think that if America, let's just say for the sake of argument, stopped existing, if we stopped being this domineering global trading giant, if we stopped leading the world in basically every economic metric, if we just
I mean,
went
let's say
dark?
the gross domestic product of the European Union overall is higher than that of the US. So
Yeah,
I
yeah, y'all. I
disagree.
mean, y'all do well over there. Absolutely, but you don't think that America fills a linchpin role just as China does in
I
the
mean, I
global
think
economy?
everybody fills an important role if the actor is big enough. I think the European Union fills a big role. I think the US fills a big role. China does. India does. These countries all have their niches that they fill and exploit in international trade to enrich their citizens.
Right, and we're not to say as though the Europe. Oh, Dongus, would you mind muting your mic? I love you. Anyway, it's not. Well, it's not to say as though the European Union and all of the nations which it constitutes are in a perfect position themselves when it comes to relating to capitalism. You say you live in Germany, right?
Yes.
Now, I would make a fool of myself if I tried to discuss the nuances of the political situations in foreign countries, so I'm not going to attempt to do so. However, the nation in Europe, which is closest to America, at least ideologically and maybe literally, I'm not sure, England,
UK? Yeah.
yes, has a wide range of problems that it is dealing with could be directly attributed to the effect the capitalist economy is having on it. I understand that this is a broad parallel, but to say that America is the sole proprietor of these deficiencies in capitalism would be, I think, an intellectual failure.
Oh no, I'm not claiming that. I'm just saying it's especially obvious in America because, for one, it's such a big, powerful country, and for the other part, you have kind of a laissez-faire approach instead of a regulation approach like most European countries do. So that kind of prevents market failures from being addressed like European countries, like the Scandinavian countries do.
I suppose, but I'm not exactly a big fan of the Scandinavian countries myself.
Because you think they delay your glorious revolution where you can slaughter the rich people?
You got it. And eat them. It's not like we'd let the bodies go to waste.
All right.
You want to talk about the revolution?
I mean, what's there to talk about, dude? You're just going to tell me how it's going to turn out wonderful. I am going to say that's not going to happen, and that's going to be it. There's nothing more we can talk about,
No,
really.
I mean I can make ethical arguments for the validity of violence against wealthy business owners. I mean, I can't tell you that any given revolution will go off without a hitch, but I can tell you that conceptually it is a valid political option.
That's going to rely on your definition of labor being exploitative, though, and I'm going to disagree with that. So we can't really unite on that point.
Well, let's start with political violence. Do you believe in political violence?
Can you kind of define that?
Sure. In the broadest sense, do you believe in engaging in political advocacy, which extends beyond the expression of your ideology and extends into the deprivation of others, whether that be their rights, their property, their belongings, their lives?
Okay. I would say yes, only in the circumstance that the government you live under does not allow peaceful protest and real change to be made peacefully. If it's the only option to dismantle a system that is inherently unjust,
So you do not
then
believe
yes.
it's valid in America because we do have freedom of speech and
Yeah,
assembly.
because you have freedom of speech. You have, if you convince enough people of your ideology, you can change it. And if you can't manage to
Well,
do that, then it's tough luck. Tough luck, I guess.
Well, not everyone's willing to give in to tough luck. You know, transgender people have had a whole bunch of tough luck for decades trying to convince the general populace that they're not a bunch of child molesting freaks. I don't think that means they should just roll over onto their bellies and give up.
I mean, what do you want? Transgenders going around and shooting Republicans, or is that going to be productive towards the betterment of their situation?
Well, let's start out simple. You know Richard Spencer, right?
Yes, I do.
Right. Coiner of the term alt-right, linchpin in the current alt-right movement, though he has seen something of a decline in the past year. Real piece of shit. Real, well-mannered, gets along fine in front of the camera, which is kind of the point. Now, he has, both directly and indirectly, contributed to the rise of a political ideology which poses a very legitimate threat to the lives of minority groups, Jews, blacks, Hispanics, and to a lesser extent, women, transgender folk, and basically everyone on the alt-right shit list. He is a threat. His existence and the things he speaks out into the microphones are a threat. Do you not believe that any of these minority groups would be right in engaging in violence against him?
No, I don't believe so. Because if you have a problem with what he says, you can counter it argumentatively. You can go through the proper channels that are set up. I think a free country. I see where you're coming from. Censorship and political violence may have its benefits, but I think overall this is dangerous, very, very much so, to produce outcomes that are bad for everybody. Political violence and censorship has been used against the left much more than the right historically, and I think allowing such practices would would be dangerous for the future. I
The
think
reason
inherently the liberal order should be prevailed.
The reason political violence is carried out more often against the left than the right is because the right has never needed society's permission to engage in political violence.
Oh, that's not true. A good example is Weimar Germany before the Nazis took power. There were censorship laws that were mostly used against the left, and also the judicial bodies were very heavily right-leaning. So they used these laws and the judicial power that they had to jail all the leftists and communists and basically spare the Nazis.
Of
They
course,
turned the term
things
light on the
things
right
get
eye.
worse when they take hold of the government, but right-leaning groups have extrajudicially engaged in violence against left-leaning groups for as long as the two sides have clashed. I mean, there were laws up and against vigilantism and murder in the South in the post-war era, but that didn't stop the Ku Klux Klan from throwing tree decorations up and across the 13 former Confederate states. This is a trend in
And
political violence.
I would be just as opposed to right-wing political violence as I would be to left-wing political violence, maybe even more so to right-wing
But
violence. But
the black woman whose husband just got lynched does not want the milquetoast sympathy of some liberal halfway across the world. She wants a gun in her hands. That's the thing. Right wingers have always felt comfortable engaging in violence because their violence, being conservative, is fundamentally an action of the status quo and works in conjunction with the state to suppress the rights of
that's
minorities.
not necessarily true. I don't think Richard Spence is working towards the status quo. I think he's working to overthrow the status quo, as most right-wing politically violent people do, because they want their own revolution that they also think is right, just like you do.
Hard disagree. Fascism would not require a revolution in this country. We have a fascist in office right now. Well,
I don't think
more than
Trump is a
one.
fascist by definition. I think maybe you could call him a proto-fascist, but not a fascist. He doesn't have the economic requirements and
Yeah, he's too stupid to be a fascist. If he were just a couple dozen IQ points smarter, he would be able to leverage his populist appeal and promote real fascism in this country. We're just lucky that voters in this country don't appreciate intelligence. That's
I
the
don't
only
think
thing that keeps him.
I don't think that could happen. Maybe if he had like a president for lifetime deal like Jinping had, but I don't think Trump,
Which he's
even in
joked
today's
about, by the
America.
way. Which he's talked about after speaking with the Chinese
Yeah,
president, and he
I
thinks it
know.
would be
That's why I
great.
brought it up.
Right. But listen, far right violence is always conducted in conjunction with the state. Police troopers turned their eyes away when black folks in the South were being lynched. When anti union violence was conducted by state and corporate security officials back during the turn of the century, the police not only permitted it, they enabled it. The US government not only allowed it, but sent troops in to assist it. When you had the marches across the country with MLK and what have you, the civil rights movement, they were put a stop to not just by the hateful populace, but by the state. This pattern continues across history. Right-wing violence and state violence conjoin in a disgusting, incestuous mix.
I
And
mean,
it
I
is
could
for
bring
this.
up left-wing violence and state violence for the Soviet countries, and
And you could make that argument in countries that have a left-wing ideological bent, but I am speaking specifically of America here.
oh yeah, for America, of course, the right wing did more political violence, especially in
And
recent
I
years.
would only talk about violent revolution in America because it is this country with which I am most familiar. But in this country, the right wing, and by the way, all you have to do is see those videos taken at alt-right rallies to see the police cozying on up to the alt-right protesters. The idea that they are just there ambivalently protecting both sides from violence is completely fallacious. When you look on the ground, when you see how police and alt-righters engage with one another in political action, the degree of support mirrored between one group and another indicates the collaboration the state has with these groups. Not unlike a, oh, hey, I secretly bought off all the police kind of thing. That's a little bit conspiratorial. But in terms of their general tendencies, the state is absolutely a proponent of right-wing violence. And it's for that reason that I support
I would
contrary
find that
violence.
very hard link to make, to say that the state is necessarily a proponent of right-wing violence, because just because cops overall tend to be more conservative, that
I mean,
doesn't mean
that's a
that the
big one.
Well,
state.
it's the state is not a monolithic entity, right? But if the people doing the enforcement of the laws have those proclivities.
Yeah,
Well,
but
no,
Yeah,
but
one way more than the other.
I don't want to dogpile no one. Let's just.
where was I? Oh, you can continue. I lost my train of thought.
I just mean to say that if we look at American history, from the Union busting that took place during the turn of the century to the state and people's collaborative reaction towards the freedom of blacks in the South, towards civil rights, towards the Stonewall riots and the protests in the 80s in favor of gay acceptance, all of these groups, towards modern day transgender rights being attacked on both ends from legislators who address them as like child molesting perverts to right wingers on the internet who address them as child molesting perverts. The collaboration between right wing and state violence is undeniable in American history. And it is for that reason that retaliatory left wing violence is not just violence, it is an act of defense. It is an act of just and ethical retaliation, which is necessary to ensure the survival of minorities in this country.
I don't even think political violence against the state or against, I don't know who you mean, like just against the conservatives, against the Republicans is even productive. I don't think that's true. I don't think it will help you reach your goals. I don't think it will achieve anything positive, at least long term. It will only serve to further entrench the positions. It will serve to further polarize and for the other side to retaliate with even more violence. I think reformism is the way to go, not
Well,
political
you know
violence.
how us lefties feel about reformism, right?
I mean, lefties is a very broad term. I would consider
Yeah,
myself
true.
very much left wing, but I don't agree.
Well, I feel, at least in the circles I run in, most leftists do tend to sneer at reformism. If we were talking about revolution in the current day, I would agree with you completely. I don't think revolution is efficacious in this here modern era for a wide variety of reasons. A
Why are there
lack
so
of
many
public,
muted people in here?
because we're all
Because
listening to myself and LEDDUDE talking.
About what?
intellectual heavyweights, dude. That's out of your league.
We're duking it out.
On what?
Uh, Leftism, I suppose, violent revolution, state
Who
violence.
is supporting violent revolution?
Me.
Oh, okay, that's good. I approve.
Thank you. Thank you. If we're talking about revolution right now, right here, of course, I disagree. Inefficacious, not enough public support, and we get trashed by the
So
majority
you're
of this
again
country.
talking about some far in the future hypothetical situation where your revolution would work out perfectly, like you
But that's
think?
what I
Or
said. No. This is what I'm saying, though. Again, I am a materialist. I believe in respecting and acknowledging the existence of material conditions as the foundation of ideological development rather than the alternative. I am not going to spend my life with a beret on the street corner handing out pamphlets advocating for revolution day in, day out, because I'm playing the long game. I and folks who are like minded to me are going to spend their lives and hopefully the lives of our children and grandchildren and so on and so forth, living their lives and waiting patiently for a time where the American political landscape is rife with antagonism towards the state and towards the wealthy. This has happened in the past and it'll happen again. There are always cycles of antagonism that broil across countries with economic and social problems. And all it takes during those times is a little spark.
so you think fueling social unrest, social distrust, and in general violence against the state itself would constitute a climate that promotes revolution?
I think if it was done intelligently and with respects to the wishes of the American public, then yes, absolutely.
Because I
We do have a
completely agree
shared
that
interest.
it would necessarily promote revolution. But the thing is, you're essentially starting something or working towards something that you have no idea if it will even produce the outcome you think, because revolution inherently is chaotic. And
I mean, yeah, that's politics. It's scary and uncertain, but what's the alternative?
I
Living with
think
capitalism
with your
forever?
strategy of promoting social unrest and distrust against the state and the country and dissidency, I think you won't end up with your preferred outcomes. It will destroy the system. It will end in violent
There have
revolution,
been
anarchy, and
there
then
have been
maybe a dictatorship.
revolutions. There have been revolutions that have panned out well in
Oh,
the
that was a
past.
huge
I
leap.
mean,
Dictatorship? Can you care to explain how do you
well,
jump from like a violent revolution to a dictatorship?
I mean, I'm just
well,
going by historic precedent. Can you tell me a communist country that it wasn't
generally
dictatorship?
speaking,
There was no effective communist country in the world because the United States
Oh, it's not
imperial
true
machine
communism, dude. It's
crushed
not true
any attempt
communism.
of
let's.
it.
I don't mean to
Yeah,
sound.
that's right. That's not true communism, and that's snarky behavior is something that I really cannot tolerate.
I completely
Sorry, dude.
sympathize, but for the sake of I think conciseness, let's probably
No,
just
you
keep
shut the
it
fuck up.
blunt. I don't mean to sound conceited or anything. In terms of authoritarian rule after revolution, what typically happens is this: a group of very intelligent and well-read middle-class people. I think, part of that group. I mean, because they tend to be ideologically motivated, take advantage of unrest and motivate large groups of the proletariat to revolt and take control from the masters of that society. It is at that point that the middle class group usually seizes ideological control of the environment, and from that point, a new autocracy is born. This happened with Lenin, who believed a vanguard party should secure the needs of the workers following a revolution, which I strongly disagree with. But fundamentally, it does seem to be a bit of a tendency in revolutions. However, there have been revolutions that have panned out well. The American Revolution was, at least in my opinion, a pretty decent example of how to further a ideological goal in a way which is respective to the interests of the populace. I think it would be possible to engage in a mode of discourse which would allow for a revolution that turns out a little bit more like the American Revolution and a little bit less like the Russian Revolution. A little bit more, hey, society is overwhelmingly favoring the rise of a new political order, and they are going to make a bid for secession, and should that fail, it's going to be a conflict, and a little bit less literally seizing Washington, D.C. with like helicopters and proclaiming a new world order.
Okay, so how it looks for me right now is you have this grand vision for the future, let's say 2070 or something, and you have a plan how you're going to get there with waypoints marked out and stuff. But it's just such a far stretch for me that you can. It's hard to formulate. Give me a second. I
But
think
that's always how it is. I don't mean to say that I have some hyper practical point by point solution to capitalism. I mean, part of
for me it
recognize.
sounds you want like a revolution to burn this shit down and then see what happens.
No, I want capitalism to end, and I don't think that is possible through reform. So I must reluctantly turn towards non-reformist strategies for bringing about the end of capitalism. There's always going to be an air of non-practical, philandering about the future when you're talking to ideologues. Jefferson, Washington, Adams, Robespierre, all of these people probably sounded like head in the clouds dipshits to their contemporaries before the material conditions of the time
And a
proved
good
them
part
right.
of them were. I mean, are you a fan of Robespierre?
He's an alright
Oh
dude.
my fucking god.
Okay.
I mean,
Look, I don't
his
agree
reign
with
wasn't called the
everything.
Reign of Terror because it was so fun. It was called the Reign of Terror because it was terrible.
Yeah, and it also established a precedent by which those who occupy the upper echelons of society should fear the masses. And that is a good precedent to set. We are the majority.
But not the upper echelons feared the masses. Everybody feared the masses. That's why
Well,
it's called the
like I
Reign of
said,
Terror, because
I
everybody
didn't
could
agree with
be
everything.
executed at any point.
Like I said, I didn't agree with everything he did, but I would rather everyone be scared of the proletariat, then no one be scared of the proletariat. Because if everyone is scared of the proletariat, at least you have aforementioned reigns of terror being doled out on ideological grounds, which arguments can be made for. If no one fears the proletariat, then everyone lives at the behest of the slave owner, the state politician, the businessman. And at that point, change cannot be made. I will always favor the implementation of values and ideologies which allow for dissidence and revolution within that society than I will for a stable and utterly unmoving paradigm.
I mean,
Status.
right now under capitalism, we don't even have a stable and unmoving paradigm. We are constantly moving, and it's in the right direction, at least. I mean, America, it's a bad example for capitalism. It's too laissez-faire, but overall, I think it's moving in a good direction for workers, for business owners, for
I
society
just
as a
don't
whole.
agree. I mean, it's going great for business owners, but I just don't agree with the assertion that life is fundamentally getting better for the average American worker. I mean,
I would much rather live now than live 50 years ago, live 100
Yeah.
years ago.
no, I
So,
agree. Capitalism has done wonderful things, and the quality of life is improving steadily for people
yes,
all around
that's
the
what I said.
world. But my problem isn't with the quality of life. My problem is with the more subtle and insidious problems with capitalist organization, with wealth inequality, with the astronomically rising costs of rent and healthcare, with the fact that capitalism does not know how to reconcile its meritocratic ideas about wealth distribution, quote unquote meritocratic, with the impending rise of automation, with the fact that the average worker is deeply alienated from that which they produce, from the fact that people have a harder time than ever before in human history making friends. How many people here in
I think
this call have trouble making friends nowadays? Don't say anything. Just like, we all know it, right? It's not you. It's not just because you're a fucking loser. That might be it, but it might also be because you live in a society that does not recognize or value human interaction.
so.
rise up.
I think you've mentioned a couple of points here, like the problems with capitalism, like the disenfranchisement and stuff. Some of that is inherent to technological progress, I would say, and some of that may be a problem of capitalism, but it can be addressed under capitalism through the form. I don't think neither communism nor violent revolution is necessary to address these problems. I think countries have done so successfully without communism or violent revolution.
I
Just
don't think there's a country
democratically.
on I don't think there's a country on this earth that is moving in a positive direction when it comes to wealth inequality, worker alienation, or like encouraging proper
What even is
socialization.
worker alienation? How do you measure that? How do you measure
Well,
the direction
this
something?
this is kind of a fundamental thing, but the idea that we're supposed to fund our existences, like the fact that you have to purchase your life by selling out your prime years doing work you don't care about, is an
I
abomination.
care
Uh,
about my work.
and that's good. That's genuinely good. I'm not making fun of that. But a lot of people don't. The vast majority of people don't. Most people do not get to make their passion a living. And that's fine. I mean, that's realistic. Not everyone can be a photographer or a porn star. That's just kind of how life is. But the fact of the matter is that most people feel a deep and begrudging sense of disconnect between themselves and that which they spend their life producing. It is a product of capitalism to disconnect the worker from his
I
from
think
his
that's a
work.
very vacuous and inconcise way of looking at it. I mean, if you compare like work today to like 200 years ago, where the smith is in his shop all day and hammering on a single iron, I mean, yeah, you had more connection back then with your work, but I think that's just necessary for modern production, for automation, for
but but there are socialist thinkers smarter than you and I who have posited workplace environments that would fix these problems and work in tandem with a modern global economy.
so
It's
why aren't
possible
they implemented if they
because
increase
it's
worker
not
happiness?
cost effective,
Oh,
because it doesn't
so
make
it's
more
less
money.
productive.
Yeah, we shouldn't sacrifice human happiness for the sake of productivity. Our society is already monstrously productive.
Right. I mean, it could be the case that chattel slavery is more productive, but we still don't engage in it, right?
I mean, you always have to find a balance between sacrificing productivity and sacrificing happiness.
But right now we sacrifice nothing for happiness. Like, it's all productivity. The only reason we
I
don't do
disagree.
slavery is because it's not socially pragmatic in this point in time. And we kind of do slavery anyway.
If we never sacrifice productivity for happiness, why have at the average working hours someone has to work for per week gone consistently down over the last 100 years?
That's not
Well,
accurate.
well,
Not
for
the United
one,
States.
for one, in the United States, they've been raising since the turn of the 20th century, and the reason they went down to 40 hours a work week was because of the violence of labor unions. It was only through political violence that we were able to secure what is now considered an ethical work week. But if it
Okay.
weren't for that, you better believe 8 years old, off to the fucking coal mines for you, 80-hour work weeks. Hell yeah. What the fuck do you need those other 24 times 7 is 104?
Yeah, but that's a positive
17,
change that wasn't brought
168.
through violent reform. I mean, I don't know much about how many hours you work in the United States, but
Well, I work 0 because I'm
yeah,
unemployed.
I know how much
but
you work, but that's not the case for everyone there.
no,
In general,
and
the United States we work more than like everywhere else on Earth.
Is that true though? I think the
it,
Chinese got a leg up on
I,
you though.
okay, but we can't. That's a very low bar. Yes, I think that as developed Western countries go, I have seen evidence to suggest that Americans do work an abominably greater amount than our contemporaries over in Europe. Whatever the case is, in America, and I must speak of America, for that is where I live and breathe. In America, I don't see any evidence to suggest a cultural or economic willingness to engage in any kind of concessions made for the benefit of human happiness.
I just googled
Workplaces have
average working
grown,
hours, and even Mexico is ahead of the US by like 20-30%.
like in terms they work more,
Let me just link that. How do I link
because
something in the
Mexico is
chat?
practically a
Hours per
failed
person.
state. So I'm not.
Sorry again, how can I
A
link something?
failed state.
Mexico's pretty bad.
Yeah, South Korea.
Just put it
Mexico's
in
been
German
doing.
voice.
I
Actually, that's
know.
kind of a generalization. Mexico's been doing pretty good.
Just
They're
Google
going.
Wikipedia working time on average. Rank 1 is Mexico, then South Korea, then Greece, then Chile, and the United States is at rank 13,
Well,
right behind Portugal.
sure. Yeah. Okay. I think that these stats have changed in the past few years per worker.
Let's see.
Well, the most recent article I can find is, let's see, American work-life balance.
It's just Wikipedia working time compared between countries.
86% of males and 67% of females work more than 40 hours a week. We work 137 more hours per year than Japanese workers, 260 more hours per year than British workers, 500 more hours per year than French workers.
At less than Portuguese, Estonian, Irish, Icelandic, Israeli, Latvian, Polish, Russian, Chile, Greece, South Korea. I mean, I can list countries that
We
do
also
work
have
less.
no paid vacation and paid holidays guaranteed by the federal government, and very, very few workplace benefits, which cuts substantially into whatever like presumptive productivity we're looking at. Okay. We can the numbers exist somewhere ephemerally in the internet, but
On
what
the
is most
Wikipedia,
important,
yes.
somewhere in some vague website that no one has ever been to. But what is most important is the fact that there is empirical evidence to suggest that, in a very material sense, working conditions in this country that I am currently living in have been decaying, at the very least since Reagan, but definitely long before then. And
That might be true. Yes, I don't know that. I don't know, but I believe you. Yes, I believe you.
But if it keeps getting like this, if the trend continues downward, if housing, if food, if transportation, gas prices have been up and down for a while now. If medical care, if insurance, if all of these things continue to raise at their current rates, and if our wages continue to stagnate at our current rates, we will become what some posit has already happened, a third world country, at least in regards to the state of our glorious ethical proletariat. And when that happens, when the state of this country, both economically and socially, arrives at a point at which people are no longer faithful in the current system, we will have to make tough choices about what comes next. And when we have to make those choices, you better fucking believe that the police, that the corporations and all of the economic power they leverage, these forces will work in tandem to prevent the worker from being able to advocate for their rights. And it is at that point that I believe the proletarian revolution is inevitable. The proletariat will whip out their turgid, oversized genitals and collectively slap America in the face with that meat. And together they will build a better society. And I do desperately hope it doesn't turn out to be some Marxist Leninist like totalitarian shit. But I mean, you know, there were other material conditions which led to those factors that
I mean, that
weren't
is your
just.
personal wet dream of what's going to happen. I don't think it.
I
don't.
am hard
I
right
don't.
now.
Yeah, I imagine. Firstly, I don't think it's even going to get to that situation. And secondly, I don't think the proletariat will rise up. I don't think what's even left of the proletariat in 2018, especially in America, does not have the will and the unity to rise up in any significant way.
So you just think the only thing stopping a revolution from taking place is the fact that the workers are too stupid and disorganized to collectively act in their interest?
I don't even think they have their interest. The workers in the United States don't really have like common interest. There isn't really a party representing them.
We all have
With that way, though.
Yeah,
I think
because the lack of class consciousness. That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm bringing to the table. I bring the class consciousness. I go to the elementary school classrooms and teach them about socialism. I go out to the fucking street and I talk to the old ladies. Huh? I've been informed that I have neighbors. Anyway, what's most important is that when that time comes, everyone is sufficiently motivated to do what they must.
Well, I again, I don't agree that you need violent revolution or communism to fix any of these problems. I think other countries have dealt with them relatively good to outcomes that are acceptable.
What
And,
country has dealt with worker alienation?
I mean, I don't even know, dude, what
So-
the fuck work alienation is. The
so,
only
like, in the
time I ever heard
Netherlands-
about it was when you talked about it, and I don't think it's like a big deal or anything.
So, like in the Netherlands, I think they require like for every 35 employees, there's like one member on the board of directors. So they kind of ease, you know, one member of the labor union on the board of directors. Like, so there's some. I mean, there's some ways you can try to like slowly.
Oh yeah, I
you
mean,
know.
strong unions are very important for an economy. I think that's probably the biggest fuck up the American economic system has, that you don't have strong unions like most European countries do, that can address these problems, you know. So overall, I don't think you need either violent revolution or communism to address all these ills that capitalism brings with it. Market failures can be accounted for by reforms, by democratic reforms, and yeah, technological progress.
The fundamental global trend towards exploitation and wealth inequality is not a
What you say
paradigm.
when you say exploitation, I just hear work, dude. I mean, that's not an
Well,
argument for me.
well, it is an argument. It's just not an argument you buy. I mean, I don't know what I can do to convince someone of the ethical necessity of a proletarian revolution if they don't believe it's a little fucked up that a person who owns a business can collect the majority of the wealth produced by it in spite of producing themselves nothing. Like, if I can't make that argument to someone and they can't buy it,
Without them, there wouldn't be a business, though. So
sure,
they are
and
producing something.
yeah,
They
and
produce the
without
business.
and without the earth beneath us, we wouldn't be able to do anything. But we don't pay dividends into a hole in the ground. People who work
because the
should be
hole
the
doesn't
people who are
work anything.
compensated.
The point of a socialist system is to make it so that there are no such people that like you couldn't have a workplace, you know, like without them providing the capital.
I mean, yeah, sure. If everybody was like perfectly selfless and worked in unison,
It doesn't. It doesn't require
maybe
everybody
would
to be
work, but
perfectly selfless.
yeah, it kind of does, because in reality, it always fails.
No,
because
no, no,
of-
no,
Okay,
no.
well
Okay,
that
okay.
now we're in a full-on meme world.
Yeah, hold on. I do have to go.
I live in
I
capitalism.
do have to go soon, but I really hold on. I do have to go soon, but there are a couple of points that I need to make before I do. For one, advocating for the status quo does not fundamentally mean that your boots are more firmly planted in reality than any other. It is important to dream up better systems. That is a fundamental component of what it means to advance human society. There will always be risks and there will always be pitfalls, but the act of being willing to move against that which you've become accustomed to is an important part of growth. And for two, it does not require unified selflessness on everyone's part to get like co-ops working in the modern and current world.
I am not arguing for the status quo. I have my own reforms I would like to be seen implemented, but I don't think I need either communism nor violent revolution to accomplish these goals. I think this can be done through the normal political process, because that's what it's there for.
Hey, Irish laddie, it's Zeta. I'm a big fan. Just wanted you to know.
Zeta, I love you. Never
I love
forget
you
that.
too. You too, brother. I just
All
wanted
right.
to say real quick.
What's this fucking gay ass fanboying?
I just wanted to say real quick. Is this not the Irish Laddie fan club? Is that not why we're all here at ACM?
Yes, we are, Zeta. Yes, we are.
Love you, Irish Laddie.
Are you like a streamer or something, or
No,
how do these people
no.
follow you?
I talk on stream with Steven sometimes, and he pretends to listen to me. Okay. There is a lot of really good literature out there on the impracticality of reformist ideology, and I would desperately love to peruse it once more so we can discuss this in the near future. However, I have to go and run an errand that expires in 24 minutes. So I have tremendously enjoyed.
It's 0 o'clock, 12 o'clock. What errands do you have to run?
I'm pretty sure I legally can't tell you.
All right, dude. You're buying weed right now, yeah?
Shh. All right. Thank you all. Shh. All right. Thank you very much. Yeah. Talk to you soon.
All right.
Hey, everyone else out there who's listening right now, why don't you try drawing? You're better at it than you think you are. Give it a shot.
I'm too busy writing.
Writing's also good. Also, wait, there's just one thing I need to say. Good pair of boots. You're still here, right? Just so you know, there's a lot of really good leftist literature on the relationship between labor theory of value and the incoming and inevitable integration of automated work in society. There's a lot of really good research out there. It's just really difficult to talk about extensively. So I strongly recommend you read it because good shit. All right, everyone, have fun drawing. Excuse me.
And now the Exodus begins.
Holy shit.
Everybody leave.
Well, thank God.
Everybody leave.
How do so many people care about this gay ass discussion, though?